to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for going beyond your capacity of where you're at today and coming. Thank you. Grace and strength, and may Yehovah touch your ankle and your ailing body wherever it is, and just comfort you and restore you.
He does.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to our subscribers and to whoever happens to come across our video, our service, and the Parashah study for today. We welcome our subscribers. We value you deeply. You're part of the family, and we feel that deeply. So all those of you who have an impetus to watch it this week, Shalom. So let me begin with our Parashah for today, which is in Parashah, chapter 41, beginning with verse 1 through chapter 44, verse 17. And the title of the Parashah today is Mikketz, which is at the end. Well, the first thing I would ask is, at the end of what? Well, it looks like we're coming to a climax of the events of the sibling rivalry and the consequences of people being at odds with one another, with people having ill towards one another, with people believing, whisper down the alley, creations, and people being jealous and what's another word? Envious and just divided, jockeying for importance and wanting to be in control. We see where of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of them has been isolated as a result of the animus of his brothers. Now, I want to point out that for us, this is a shadow of the community of believers and how they function and relate to one another and process information between one another in the synagogue, in the community, in churches and denominations. And in some places there's a great chemistry. And in some places everybody just kind of get along. And if not, they leave and find a place where they can get along. And maybe never really deal with the issues. And we see that all the time. And we see it here that God has a purpose and a plan for you and for wherever you're at in the community of believers that you are engaging. And we see that. Here we have half brothers, whole brothers, siblings, all from the same father, living together, which that was the culture, and that was how it was at that time. And in a similar stance, do we not see those same elements today when we have, brothers and sisters that are from the first marriage or the second marriage, and you're all just the same elements, the same challenges. And so in this Parashah we see Joseph interprets dreams. the dreams of Pharaoh. That he, in that, rises to power. And in the events of the day, I want to point out that, when we have issues within the community or within our family, God's going to move things around until things are resolved. He will move things externally and internally amongst people, where eventually God's going to put you in a place where you got to deal with it, where you got to come to, do you want to honor God? Do you want to honor what His Torah tells us to do? His Torah explains and instructs us on how to relate to one another, on how to speak with one another, on what attitudes and positions to take on matters, and what should be brought forward and addressed or not addressed. You see, Joseph's brothers thought everything was taken care of. They didn't have to worry about Joseph anymore. They didn't have a family issue that needed to be resolved. But that's not how God saw things. And because Jacob, one of the patriarchs, through whom which God said He is going to bring forth His plan to the nations, as in Abraham and Yitzhak, God was intimately involved in bringing to bear His plan. Same way in our lives. I don't know what you have going on in your life in detail. I know in mine, I'm at a turning point, a transition. There's things taking place where, there's going to be a change in my life in the next, I'd say, at least what I perceive. I could be wrong, but it appears that there are some changes coming. And so we see here that in the case of Joseph and Pharaoh, all that Joseph had been through now has accumulated to the point where God can use him to change or shape the destiny of Egypt and the Hebrews, the Jews, the Israelites, the sons of Israel. So God can fulfill His word to Abraham, who said, your descendants will be in Egypt for 430 years. And we're seeing that begin to unfold. We see how this whole thing evolves, where Joseph's dream begins to manifest itself. Now, do you think he had a dream and he understood it all? If you recall the dream, it wasn't actual physical people, but they were concrete elements that symbolized and characterized what was going to happen in the future, where they bowed down to him, and the stars, and the whole dream has a lot of symbolism. And he didn't know what it was going to play out like, like in real time, but I guarantee you, as each of us have experienced in our own lives, a dream usually is cast in figures and elements that are symbolic. And at least what I found is, as I enter the unfolding of that dream, I begin to see those symbolism things be connected to real-time people and events. Can you relate to that? Okay. And so it says in chapter 41, and I really want to focus in again this Parashah on the elements of who Joseph's character, some of the unique qualities about Joseph that I think we need to emulate in our own lives and in our community, in how we talk to one another, think about one another, and more so than anything, not judging one another. So it says in chapter 41, Pharaoh had a dream. So Pharaoh had the dream. And we know that Joseph had interpreted a dream, and that the cupbearer of the wine remembered Joseph interpreting his dreams and how they came to pass. And so when the time came where the wise men of Egypt couldn't interpret clearly Pharaoh's dream, the cupbearer remembered Joseph's dream interpretation and how he was right on. So Pharaoh summons him. It says that Pharaoh summoned Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. He shaved himself, changed his clothes, and came into Pharaoh. When the time's right, God's moving in your life, He's going to bring you out, clean you up, and bring you forward in what He has for you to bring forth in His plan. And we see this in Joseph's life. But Pharaoh, in verse 15, said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. You're going to find something in your life that's going to come forth that you don't know what to do with it. God's going to show you. If you humble yourself, if you're patient, if you exercise faith in Him. Because without faith we can't please Him, and we want to please Him. And it says here, but I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And this is the thing that we need to be really conscious of within our families, within our community, and in our relationship with the Lord. When we think we hear God, okay, we need to put that into perspective. When we think we know how to interpret a dream, we need to put it into perspective. And who is the example of putting that into perspective? Right here. Joseph. And Joseph in this situation mirrors Yeshua. And the way Yeshua walked his journey to fulfill the purpose for which God created him or brought him forth into this world. And be it known, it was Yehovah that brought Yeshua forth. Okay? Just remember, Yeshua is seated at the right hand of the Father. He is not the Father. He's Yeshua. But here we see that Joseph's response to Pharaoh, saying to him, when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. He's declaring that Joseph is the one that Pharaoh sees as the one able to interpret it. And we see ourselves as being the ones that can interpret our own dreams. And hear the voice of God telling us. And I'm not saying that you don't hear Him. But we hear things all the time. The question is, how do we interpret it? There's a lot of voices out there. There's a lot of meaning out there. There's a lot of facts out there. There's a lot of hearsay. Because in the real world, remember, the evil one has access to our mind, our thoughts. Why else would Paul say that the evil one, the devil, will throw fiery darts at us? Well, where's he throwing them? He's throwing them into our thoughts. What does Paul say? Cast down every imagination, every thought that exalts itself above the knowledge of Yehovah. Well, what is it in our nature that causes us, we were talking about this earlier, light becomes as light, and we hear things, and He tells us things, and we think it's all God. We need to be able to divide the words of truth that Yehovah is speaking to us, which He does speak to us, but we need to know how to divide truth from lie, imagination from reality. And we need to realize who we are, that our self-image is not so puffed up that we don't see ourselves for who we really are. At the end of the day, it's really, we've got to be careful that our ego, our pride, and our self-interest isn't what is driving our imagination and driving our interpreting what's entered our thoughts. Because that's where the wrestling match is. Are you with me? What sets Joseph apart here is he says to Pharaoh, after Pharaoh says, I heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And you know, Joseph didn't say, well, Pharaoh, as a matter of fact, you're absolutely right. I have the gift of interpreting dreams. You really should listen to what I have to say, because I can help you. Okay. Was that Joseph's response? No. What was it? He humbled himself. He recognized, and I think this is very, very poignant about who Joseph was. We see this in the unfolding of the events in his life when he was thrown into the cistern, when he was sold into Egypt with the Ishmaelites, and when he was in Potiphar's house. It's important that we see how he reacted. It tells us where his heart was bound to. It wasn't bound to his interests, his desires, what he thought. He didn't take joy in his ability to walk in that manner, in that attitude. He walked humbly. And if Yosef is the suffering servant, a shadow of the Messiah, here is a perfect example of it. Yosef said, "It isn't me. It's not me interpreting the dream. It's not me that has the gift of interpreting it." He says, God will give Pharaoh an answer that will set his mind at peace. Now, where does that place the emphasis now? Not on Joseph. Joseph doesn't say, "It isn't in me, but I'll give you the answer to set your mind at peace." He recognized it isn't emanating from him. He was basically saying, God's going to tell you. God's going to speak to you. And when he does, it's going to be characterized by giving you peace, shalom. The evil one likes to fill our mind with thoughts and ideas and imaginations that exalt themselves above the knowledge of Jehovah. To those of you who are listening to this message, in the background, it's the local fire company here in Schnecksville. It's Santa Claus Day, and he's passing through town. So, if you hear a lot of sirens, it's the fire company. That's the world we live in. So, that's where they're at. We have to respect people's where they're at. You don't have to agree with them, but be characterized by love your neighbor as yourself. That's the first step. Show love. Show patience. Show the fruit of the Spirit. Love, patience, kindness, long-suffering, shalom.
Is that what spiritual warriors do? Is that what spiritual warriors do?
They do both. They fight, but they fight with integrity that reflects the fruit of the Spirit. They know who they are, they know where they stand, and they know where the line is that separates them from themselves and walking in their own will, desires, and ego versus humbling themselves before Jehovah and doing what Yeshua did, doing what Joseph just did here. Joseph equivalently did what Yeshua did in John Yochanan 5:19. Yeshua said this to them. This is when he was being questioned, how he does what he does. He said, "Yes, indeed, I tell you that the Son cannot do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does too." And what is Joseph doing here? It isn't me. If it isn't Joseph, well, who's he looking at? He's looking at Jehovah. Jehovah will give Pharaoh an answer that will set his mind at peace. Yeshua saw what the Father was doing and did it. He didn't steal the glory of God. Joseph did not steal the glory of God in the moment of being lifted up by Pharaoh. He humbled himself and acknowledged Jehovah. Yosef directed everything away from him being credited to Jehovah. You see, we gotta be careful how we think we know things. Like, the Lord gave me a message, or I had a dream, and God told me. Well, it's important that you understand to whom that knowledge is credited to. That you don't wave your, I hear from God. Well, yeah, I'm sure you do. But you know what? If you're married, do you let your friends know everything that your wife says to you? Or is there an intimacy there? Do you let your friends know everything your husband's said to you? Or revealed to you? Or is that between you and him? You see, I think we need to recognize what it is that is motivating us to say those things. You don't need to know all my conversations with my closest friends, and I'm not inclined to share them with you because it's my business, what they say to me. Or my wife. Which I don't have one right now, but that's okay. But the reality is, it's none of your business. And I think we need to be careful how much we share. Don't wear your feelings on your sleeve, it says in Proverbs. And be careful that you don't, we can go overboard with things. And so, we see that Joseph is mirroring what will one day be Yeshua the Messiah. And now, such is something to think about on a side note in this story, because Pharaoh elevated Joseph to the viceroy of Egypt, second in command, because Joseph humbled himself, honored God, didn't honor himself, and God raised him up. You humble yourself before the Lord, as Joseph did. He was, 17 and naive, telling all his brothers about the great dreams he had. And I think it was probably very innocent. But it incensed his brothers, and it brought out the jealousy, the envy, the controlling attitudes, the bad attitudes, the negativity. But Joseph continued to humble himself. Got into Egypt, was put in prison, to be drawn out of prison and brought into Potiphar's house. He had to be humbling himself. He had to be there on good conduct and behavior. He humbled himself. And even when he had the incidents with Potiphar's wife, he didn't get upset, angry, be belligerent. He humbled himself. And then he went back to prison. And he humbled himself there. And step by step, it wasn't about Joseph. How else would he have gotten to this point? To acknowledge that God is the one, Pharaoh, that will give you this. And I think there's even a point in here, and it seems like I didn't highlight it like I usually do, but it's interesting that Pharaoh recognized, and I don't see where it is exactly, but it's here, is that he recognized that God was with Joseph. Now I have a question. When people think about Egypt, they think about this pyramid and the evil eye on the back of the dollar, which that's not what it is. If you do the research and study, it's all about God. What's God, the creator of the universe, what's he doing on top of a pyramid? On an emblem, on a seal of something that was created. Well, everybody thinks Egypt was an evil place. They had many gods. But if you don't educate yourself and understand how all those gods emerged, and how perhaps Egypt at one point was a God-fearing nation, as we're seeing here, because if you study, what's her name? Osnat, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. Well, who were they? What were they all about? Why would God let Joseph marry a pagan? Joseph was acknowledging Jehovah. So that leads me to logically deduce that there had to be something in the ancient world going on that reflected the acknowledgement of the creator of the universe. Does that make sense? How much do you really know about the ancient world? Because you got to explain this. If God is who, remember, we look at Scripture and look back at things from our world and where we're at and our resource of knowledge and experience, and we know nothing about the ancient world. God was doing real well and alive then, just as he is now. He was revealing himself back then, just as he is now. So be careful when you draw conclusions from your perspective in 2025 and judge what was going on in what was it, 1400 BCE? I mean, really? You're a little puffed up. Joseph wasn't puffed up. Joseph humbled himself. Acknowledged where things came from. And Yosef was married to the daughter of Osnat. I don't know, it's pretty interesting if you ask me. I'm not going to go into the depth of what was going on in Egypt, but it's apparent what we perceive and what its reality are two different things. And the truth of the matter is, you don't know what you don't know. And if you think you know everything, even the things that you think you know, you don't know. Just the way it is. Here's one little thing you may not know. My son is a history major graduate and has his master's in it. And I've gotten some of his books because it interests me as well. One of them was on determining, doing the exegesis and the research on history. The reality is in most cases we only have evidence, enough information to determine what was going on in a specific incident, maybe 20% of it. So, excuse me, guess what has to happen to fill in that 80%? So you're reading about Joseph, and from 2025 you think Egypt was an evil place because God put plagues on him and everything. Well, maybe they knew about God, but devolved into a place by 430 years later, where as we are in America at a turning point of turning away from God, well, maybe Egypt turned away from God. Maybe God was prevalent and knowable in a form different from what we have experienced because of all the information that's been written and given to us. It's not the same. Different culture, different scenery, different elements. So, it's interesting. I'm going to get to it. This might help you understand what I'm getting at. God has some very interesting things to say about Egypt, about Israel, and about Assyria, Babylon. It's actually good. It speaks volumes that God was real at some point to each of those groups of people. And one of them remains vibrant and has carried the Torah to 2025, preserved it, shamar, guarded it. It's interesting. Getting back to the relationship, I'm really kind of threading the needle here with all the different kind of elements. And if I'm all over the place, I apologize, but it's a pretty dense Parashah of information and issues and events. And so I just want to point out one thing when I was talking to you about community and the sibling rivalry and the knowledge of what his brothers perceived and thought about him. It says, Yosef saw, this is in chapter 42, verse 7, Yosef saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted towards them as if he were a stranger and spoke harshly with them. Well, I think today, you read that, most people say, that wasn't very nice of him to speak to him, to speak to his brothers like that. But what's missing?
The youngest brother.
That's one thing. Joseph was plugged in to what God was doing. And it wasn't time to reveal who he was. There's a lot of things that you may think you know about what you know that God hasn't revealed the whole thing to you, and you've drawn a conclusion and believe in things that are flurious, that are meshugana, are garbage, are lies, deceptions, half half-truths. But you've drawn a conclusion. Because you don't have all the information. You don't have all the evidence. You think you know, but you don't know what you don't know. How could you draw the conclusion when you really only have, in some cases, 5% of the information to prove what it is that you believe? And then, as I see believers, once they have that, they get their sword out and they have the truth. And they're going to make sure you know the truth. See, because God's spoken to them. But Joseph says, no. God will tell you, Pharaoh, it's not me. How often do we do that to one another? We think we know it all. And we haven't, we've drawn conclusions that we haven't gone to the point to establish the evidence and the facts. I mean, you can write all the books you want about, the ghost of Sleepy Hollow. But that doesn't mean it was real. Think about it. Why? I got this book, The Ghost of Sleepy Hollow. He was real. And there were people that followed him and believed in him. Were you there? It's 2025. That was in the 1700s. Were you there? What evidence do you have? Well, you see, there's a town in upstate New York where all this took place, and the town's there. So what? There's a lot of things that exist. But did you see the guy ride through town? No. Well, then how do you know? Whisper down the alley. Whisper down the alley. You know what that is? It's called presumption. It's called being presumptuous. Do you know that the Torah speaks vehemently about the sin of breaking the law, the mitzvot of the Torah, of being presumptuous? You see, what we see happening here with Yosef, you see, is Yosef recognized his brothers. They didn't recognize him. There may be brothers around that you don't recognize them for who they are. It's just who you presume they are because of all the hearsay and all the lashon hara, the gossip. But you really don't recognize your brother. You see, Joseph concealed his knowledge. You think that was right? Well, he should have told us who he was. That's not right. Why didn't he tell us that he was Joseph? Because maybe God had a plan to reconcile some things. Maybe God had to deal with the corrupt hearts and controlling hearts that were prevalent amongst some of his brothers. And we can clearly see who some of them are. And that spirit and attitude persists through to today. So be careful who you indict. It's best that you keep your mouth shut. It's best that you pause and you wait on the Lord to reveal more. Notice with the Brown University shooting, did they jump right out and say, oh, it's that guy? No. They didn't presume. They did the investigation. And they followed the trails in order to give them what? Facts. You know, I can't think of what it's called, but my son was telling me about there's a certain thing in psychology, I think, where you see a design, and in that design of lines and circles and curves, some people see images that other people don't see. And some people make images by looking at all that's there. They create it with a purpose. They can turn it into a folklore story. They could write a book about it. It's endless. We all see things and imagine things. And you can actually make it look really real. That doesn't mean it's real. Until you get to the heart of the people that actually designed it, planned it, built it, and did it. And what is worse, the further and further away in time and years you go from that original person, people that created it, the less you can prove it and take it like money to the bank. What does that tell you? Maybe some people know things because it's not time for them to be revealed. Just look at Yeshua. How long was he walking around before he was revealed?
At least 30 years.
We're so dense. We think we know it all. And so, as we look to chapter 42, verse 21, we see Joseph's withholding knowledge and information was used as a means of starting to bring out issues in his brothers. They said to each other, "We are in fact guilty concerning our brother. He was in distress and pleaded with us. We saw it and wouldn't listen." Wow. They're starting to think about what they did. They're starting to be convicted about what they did. How they didn't listen and value their brother. They didn't value that God was moving on him to accomplish things for the kingdom of God. But now God's bringing that to bear. See, God Nothing was going to thwart God's plans for Joseph. God used their evil inclination, their envy and jealousy and pride and egos and seeking their own interest and control and wanting to do their thing and being favored over Joseph because they got jealous, because actually this tallit is the tallit for Joseph. Actually, the coat of many colors, that's what this tallit is. But God began to unveil and convict them for one purpose, and we're going to get to that, I think, in the next Parashah. Doesn't it sound so Joseph when he said, well, I'm not the one that's going to interpret it, God is? Doesn't it sound so much like Joseph? Well, it's okay. I'm not angry with you guys. I know it was probably wrong, but see, God was using that in order to bring us all down here to save the line of the Messiah. Think about it. Joseph wasn't thinking of himself. He said, God, I understand what you're doing, and I'm going to do it. He had his eyes on the Father, and he was interested in seeing what the Father was doing so that he could do it and be the instrument and tool in God's hand to bring it forth. It wasn't an easy road. It wasn't fun. He was without much. Accused. Degraded. Because of their own selfish desires and interests. And we see them beginning to basically turn in upon another. When he says, he was in distress and pleaded with us, we saw it and wouldn't listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Oh, we're waking up, aren't we? You know? Reuben answered them, didn't I tell you, don't wrong the boy? But you wouldn't hear of it. Now comes the reckoning of his blood. Things happen in our lives that we pursue it with our own self-interests. And we harm a lot of people along the way. We're all guilty. At one time or point or another. We're all guilty. Self-interest. It's our fallen nature. And it happens in the body of Messiah. It happens in the synagogue, in the church, in denominations. It really happens in the corporate world pretty virulently. If you've been there, it's a dog-eat-dog world. Everybody's out for themselves. Has some of that spilled over into our religion? You see, I think it's really important to think about. You see, God blessed Joseph. He had 2 sons before the year of famine came. Asnat, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Yosef called the firstborn Manasseh, causing to forget. You see, Joseph humbled himself, saw God, what he was doing, and he did and worked with and harmonized and walked with. He wasn't interested in accusing them or getting his sword out and saying, "You evil people, you're wrong. You're doing stuff that's wrong. You're involved in things that are wrong." God's a lot bigger than those wrong things that you think. Much bigger than them. Can change a situation like that. There's no thing is too big for our God. God caused him, as Joseph walked in unity. As in, and I'm going to say it again, John 15, verse 7 to 12. If you remain united with me, Yeshua, and my word, you'll ask anything that you want, and it will happen for you. Because this is how you bear fruit, and how Jehovah is glorified. But it's a progression. Remain united with Yeshua. And the Word, the Torah, remain united with it. Know it. Know the boundaries that God set between how we should relate to Him and how we should relate to one another. You see, the second he called Ephraim, meaning fruit, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortune. So wherever your misfortune is right now, if you keep your eyes on Him, and if you put your sword in its sheath and stop swinging it around at people, because you're going to hurt people, God's not going to elevate you. It's best to keep your mouth shut. Because a lot that comes out of our mouths is presumption, hearsay, lashon hara, and we have no proof or evidence. And quite frankly, the news is the number one source of that. YouTube is the second source of that. I think as believers, we need to relate to one another on the premise that, let me just, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I just want to, there's a way we need to relate to one another. Deuteronomy 17:13. All the people will hear about it and be afraid to continue acting presumptuously. When we act presumptuously towards one another, when we follow the evil path of presuming, listening to hearsay without evidence, Deuteronomy 19:15, one witness alone will not be sufficient to convict a person of any offense or sin. Of any kind. Any kind. She's a witch. She's a witch. Remember Monty Python? And she's saying, I'm not a witch. I'm not a witch. But they kept walking behind her. She's a witch. She's a witch. They were presuming. There was hearsay. Lashon hara, gossip. And that all leads to believing it. Do you understand how manipulated you are? In the news, in YouTube, in politics, in your associations? The evil one has access to our minds, our thoughts. He casts imaginations on us and high things that exalt themselves above the knowledge of God. You know, the kingdom of God is a court where there's legal precedence, legal order, presumption, the preponderance of evidence. Presumption is an attitude adopted in law or as a matter of policy toward an action or proposal in the absence of acceptable reasons to the contrary. Now, I just read a mitzvah. All the people will hear about it and be afraid to continue acting presumptuously. There's an event here that it's tied to. And then in Deuteronomy 19:15, one witness alone will not be sufficient. That was the whole case with the woman caught in adultery. And then we still have people saying, well, no, there was somebody there. Well, how do you know? Why would Yeshua say to them, where's your witnesses? There weren't enough. They didn't have 2 or 3 witnesses that were there, that witnessed it. That means you're physically there. Now stop and think. Propaganda, misinformation, fake news. Do you see how evil has consumed the minds of the world? Lies, distortions, deceit. So, what are we doing? See, when we relate to one another as brothers and sisters, we should not be presumptuous of the hearsay that comes across our path. Hearsay, you know what hearsay is? Information received from other people that one cannot adequately substantiate. It's a rumor. You listen to YouTube on a whole variety of topics. It's hearsay. Somebody's saying something. You're hearing it and they're saying it. You have no adequate ability to substantiate it. You can substantiate this. God is not a liar. So why are we spending all our time listening to conspiracies and crazy accusations about things across the board? Why are we doing that?
90% are correct.
What's that?
Quite a few of them have been turned out to be correct.
that's fine. But it's how, so Joseph knew that they were his brothers, but he didn't reveal it. And on another note, we have here a lot about this is all taking place in Egypt. And I would say, in mostly amongst the unschooled, uneducated, and I mean uneducated meaning scholarly, okay, and most people's image of Egypt, it's all these different gods, and they worshipped Horus, and they did Osiris, and you don't know nothing. You really don't. You think you do. But my question to you is, what does God think about Egypt? What does God think about Israel? What does God think about Assyria? You ought to take the time to read Isaiah 19, because it appears that Isaiah is prophesying about the development and the God's dealing with Egypt and what he's going to do. And it leads me to think, can't prove it, I'm saying this is just my drash, what I feel, what I sense. Because why would God speak this way and say the things he's saying here? I'm going to read chapter 19 of Isaiah briefly, not all of it, but just kind of what alludes to how important Egypt and Assyria and Israel are. Chapter 19, chapter 19, starting with verse 19. On that day there will be an altar to Adonai in the middle of the land of Egypt. An altar in the middle of the land of Egypt, as well as a standing stone for Yehovah at its border. My goodness, they're worshiping Yehovah, Adonai, Elohim. I thought they were into these pyramids. I thought that all these weird things went on. Well, maybe a society, a people that turned away from God devolved into things that were idolatrous. But so did Israel. And so did the Syrians and the Assyrians. On that day, there will be an altar to Adonai in the middle of the land of Egypt, as well as a standing stone for Adonai at its border. It will be a sign and witness to Adonai Sivaot in the land of Egypt, so that when they cry out to Adonai for help because of the oppressors, he will send them a Savior to defend and rescue them. Adonai will make himself known to Egypt on that day. The Egyptians will know Adonai. They will worship him with sacrifices and offerings. They will make vows to Adonai and keep them. Yet Adonai will strike Egypt, both striking and healing, so they will return to Adonai. Now I got to ask you a question. Going back to the eye, the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid. The Latin there is referring to God. Isaiah is prophesying here, and in verse 22, it says, "Yet Adonai will strike Egypt, both striking and healing, so they will return to Adonai." Well, if they're returning, that means they had to gone away from him. They had to worship and acknowledge him and honor him at some point. Doesn't that make sense? Why would you return to Adonai if you never left him? Have you left him at any point in your life? Have you returned to him in a new way, in a deeper way? You're no different. Who do we think we are? We judge and condemn other people, and we're no different. Egypt will return. He will listen to their prayers, and he will heal them. Wow. On that day, verse 23, there will be a highway from Egypt to Asher. Asher will come to Egypt, and Egypt to Asher, and Egypt will worship with Asher. That means Assyria is going to worship God as well. The God we serve. Why do you think all this is going on in the Middle East? God is revealing himself. All that has been hidden will come out into the open. Just as Joseph will bring everything out into the open. He's not the bad guy. Which there's some believers that see him as the bad guy. Believers in Yeshua and Jesus that would look at that and say, well, that's not very nice. No. Joseph is following what he sees his father doing, not what he wants to do. On that day, Israel will be a third partner with Egypt and Asher. A blessing here on earth. Can you imagine that? It's all going to be well. It's all going to be healed and restored and renewed. When we go along and we judge what we see now, we're not looking at God. We're looking at our own intellectual imaginations and what we think our opinion. And we're entitled to our opinion. But when it drives the way we relate to our neighbor, to whom we are supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves, we do the name of Jehovah a disservice, and we think we're following Torah when in essence we're following ourselves and our own interests and desires. I want to leave you with this. You see, in our thoughts, that's where the battle is. That leads us down so many rabbit trails of fear and insecurity. When we presume something without evidence, without 2 or 3 witnesses, without bringing a matter before a court to be judged. You see, when we listen to the hearsay, which is unsubstantiated, when we listen to Lashon Hara and gossip, whisper down the alley without any evidence, without 1, 2 or 3 witnesses that were there, and we act on that knowledge, we do great harm. to whomever it's directed towards. And I say to you, it's best that you hold your tongue and pray for that person. Pray for them. Whatever it is that you see that you think they're engaged in, what is the best to do? To pray. Intercede for them. Because that's what Yeshua is doing. And that's what Yeshua is doing because that's what the Father is doing. And until there's harmony and unity in the body of Messiah, there will be division and strife and discord and people running around with a sword that they think is the truth, just killing everybody. Really. Lashon hara means to hold. You're to hold your tongue. I'll give you an example. And I'm going to close. I had a friend who actually came to this congregation. Died of cancer. Jewish. Born Jew. I became very close to him and tried to help him along in his pain that he had been through both emotionally and mentally and just, oh God, I know he's with Jehovah now. I don't doubt that. But when I found out that he had passed away, and I called and spoke to a family member, he had gone to a very dear friend and doctor of mine that I know, not conventional medicine, not the medicine that's common, but natural medicine, homeopathic medicine. And when I spoke to this family member, they started condemning the doctor in many different ways. All I had to say to him, because as a Jew you learn this young, all I had to say to him is, brother, you should not be talking badly about this brother, this fellow Jewish doctor. It's Lashon hara. Like that. Silence. Stop. He says, you're right. Ended it immediately. Because he knew the Torah. He understood the mitzvot. And immediately he ceased all reference in any way towards speaking about this other Jewish brother, friend of mine. So what I would say to you that are listening, we need to keep our mouths shut. If you have no proof, you have no witness, if you have no evidence, if you weren't there, if it's a imagination of somebody else's mind that wrote a book that presumes this is what it represents, or imagined it being there, just like somebody can look at a picture and see, you had 10 people that all see something different. And they could all draw it out, then you might see it. But then you take that and run with it and tear people down. You should be praying for them.
That's right.
And keep your mouth shut and speak your concerns to God. And He may tell you to shut up as well. And pray for good, for grace, for mercy, for strength for that person to get through whatever it is they're in or caught up in. And to continue to associate with them within reasonable boundaries of the circumstance. All these elements interplayed with what we see happening between Joseph and his brothers. Like I said last week, Genesis is probably the best psychology book, psychiatry book ever written. You should study it, because it's not just about that, but God reveals how He and what He is about and doing. Baruch Hashem. I hope this broadened your perspective and how you look at the world that you function in your families, in your faith community, in your calling, and in your coming in and going out, and your rising up and your lying down. May Yehovah, the Elohim of Shalom, which passeth all understanding, may He guard your will, your conscience, your intuition, your mind, your thoughts, your intellect, your feelings, your emotions, in Messiah Yeshua. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Yehovah make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yehovah lift up His countenance upon you and give you His shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
This is Rabbi Moshe from Beit Torah in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. Come and visit us if you're moved. If the messages are a blessing to you, I'll be very honest with you, we struggle here to make ends meet. We're a small congregation. If you're moved to send a gift to help us, we are grateful. More than that, I pray that this has helped you. Shabbat shalom.
Hear now, Jacob my servant. Hear now, O Israel. It was I